sad smiles on faces scarred by war. Even the purest symbols of hope and love now bear eternal scars, engraved by a conflict that has transcended any human planning. The war, once calculated on maps and strategies, has taken on a life of its own. A monster that fed on days of hatred and bled under the arid lands of Iraq, leaving behind not only scorched earth, but souls branded by fire. Did those spirits belong to soldiers or to those who loved them? This photo is a symbol of a war. When it went viral on the internet, many thought it was fake, just a mere montage. The sadness in their eyes is so deep that it makes the hope for life a little bitter. This man is Tyler Ziegel, an American born in Peoria, Illinois in 1982. He grew up in a simple home with his siblings Jeffrey and Rebecca. His father was a builder and his mother was a waitress. His childhood was no different from that of many Americans. He started dating early at school Renee Klein, who was 3 years younger. But who did he fall in love with back then? Tyler had very clear plans for his future. After leaving school, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. It was his time to fulfill his duty to his country. Hey, the September 11 attack was still on his mind and strengthened his heart with a sense of duty to his country. The training ended in 2003, followed by tension about his fate during a turbulent time for the United States military. It was the year Operation Iraqi Freedom began, when George W. Bush went on television to announce that Saddam Hussein, at the time one of the major villains chosen by the media, now had weapons of mass destruction and needed to be stopped. Saddam was no longer making headlines as much as he did in the 1990s during Operation Desert Storm because of the crazy idea of invading Kuwait and taking away precious oil resources from the Americans. Now, in the 2000s, the focus was on Osama bin Laden, and rightfully so, after what happened on September 11, 2001. But unlike bin Laden, everyone knew where Saddam was, and he shared with Osama very good reasons to be hated. For example, he persecuted the Kurds, even using poison gas. It is estimated that 182,000 Kurds were deported, killed and disappeared in depopulation campaigns in Kurdish areas. In addition, there was violence, murder, torture, execution, arbitrary imprisonment, illegal detention, forced disappearance, and various forms of repression to control the population. A good resume for a villain, a good reason to remove him from power. But in the end, that wasn't enough. Weapons of mass destruction emerged into the media as a major motivation.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein was determined to get his hands on a nuclear bomb,
nuclear weapon, nuclear weapon, nuclear weapon,
active chemical munitions bunkers, mobile production facilities.
We know he has got chemical weapons. He's got them.
The Americans started to get ready. Tyler was one of those selected to go to Iraq. Proudly, he hugged Renee and left despite his mother's fears. That would be his first time in combat. He wasn't part of the first group of Marines to arrive there. The 1st Marine Division, reinforced by other Marine brigades, was one of the first units to cross the land border between Kuwait and Iraq. Kuwait served as a large ship a concentration and logistics point for coalition forces before the invasion. When he finally set foot in Iraq, reality started to hit Tyler, even though he was still caught up in the initial excitement that a young man feels in war. The scorching, arid desert air brought an unfamiliar feeling to many, while the monotonous, dusty landscape was completely different from his daily life. The persistent smell of dust, fuel, and occasionally sewage debris filled the air. But victory was in his blood. The United States was crushing the Iraqi forces. Meanwhile, civilians wept as they watched the disaster of democracy coming to their country. Bodies were scattered in as many places as the violence of war could reach. The invasion was part of the terror in people's lives. Obviously, there were those who celebrated, like the people whom Saddam Hussein tortured, killed, and poisoned. During his dictatorship, Tyler joined his brothers who fought against soldiers loyal to Saddam Hussein, or insurgents who didn't want American forces in their country. The shots targeted the technical vehicles, many of them improvised with heavy weapons. The machines took fire from the Americans until missiles flew in to engulf them in flames. But it seemed like the fighting never ended. Despite the overwhelming strength of the Americans and most of the Iraqi army, they did not offer any threatening resistance. The rifles had to work at full capacity. Iraqi snipers were everywhere. They moved stealthily between houses, leaving parts of their rifles and assembling them in positions where they could observe the Americans on their patrols. Very easy targets who started to fall as soon as the triggers were pulled and the bullets flew. 1W Super Cobra helicopters from the Marines flew over the Iraqi cities, searching for the pickup trucks carrying the Iraqis' heavy machine guns or cannons. The 20mm M197 Gatling cannon, mounted in a turret on the nose, would fire until it tore through the enemy vehicle and made its ammunition explode. The effectiveness of an Apache helicopter was not much different. The main function of an Apache helicopter was to be a heavy attack aircraft designed to destroy armored targets and provide close air support in any weather condition, day or night. The 30mm M230 chain gun fired at a rate of 625 rounds per minute. Its attacks pierced light armor and disintegrated unarmored vehicles. War was not easy. After his first trip to Iraq, Tyler's body remained intact, but his soul was scarred. He was welcomed by Renee with the passion that youth brings. It was a time when the horror of Iraq had not yet taken away his hope. Engaged, they promised to get married as soon as Tyler returned from his second trip to Iraq. He left with big plans, listened to his friends, jokes about marriage, and had fun at the base hearing about the fate of a married man. He was at Al-Assad Air Base in the western part of the country, the second largest base at the time. Now, Iraq in 2004 was a different story. The wounds the country had bled from had festered. The Americans didn't do much to treat them. There, a poison was born that began to make the nation more and more moribund. The insurgents grew dissatisfied with what the Americans had done in their country. Many had already been fed anti-American propaganda for years, but now they witnessed firsthand some truths. about the so-called democracy they brought as a gift, the democracy that arrived in GU. It seemed to be just another condition of bringing a ballot boxes so Americans could vote on military bases abroad and their own presidents. From dissatisfaction and hatred, some managed to make great spoons out of it. Men with dark hearts, with evil attached to their souls, who would give it shape. Latter groups known as the Islamic State. Men placed mortars in the streets to join the insurgents after using weapons left over from the Iraqi army, or they were smuggled in from other regions of the Middle East. It was a fight in which numbers and surprise, creating enemies everywhere, tried to balance out the military superiority of the Americans. The Iraqis launched their rockets and mortars at the troops, keeping the streets as a battlefield. Their RPGs kicked up dust as they were fired from behind the walls. The machine guns fired randomly to create suppression, allowing the RPGs to keep flying. Tanks like the Abrams or armored transports like the Bradley suffered from these shots. The Americans responded with what they had. The javelins, not so famous at the time, flew with deadly precision against Iraqi attack positions. The combat posts had to be defended against threats that appeared without warning, no matter how much the Americans tried to gather intelligence. The various armed groups were able to move and attack their bases from different points. They could be safe in there. But just a few distractions were enough for the Iraqis to cause some deaths and destruction, enough to serve as propaganda for the insurgency. As the American explosives flew against the Iraqi bases, the soldiers entered the fortified house only afterward. They threw grenades down the stairs, knowing the enemies were there. At a time when war was changing, some of these squads didn't have the same skill for entering these environments, confined. Confused soldiers had to deal with the pressure of risking themselves on stairs or doors where AKs waited to swallow their souls. Screams came from inside, challenging the invaders. Indeed. It was with great effort that the squad finally managed to get in, often using procedures that weren't exactly according to the manuals. The hippies pointed toward the rooms, trying to cover all the sides from which attacks could come. An abandoned rocket-propelled grenade on the wall showed that the enemies had been there, but managed to escape. Soldiers had to follow the enemies to the next house where they hid. This time they took no chances at the entrance. Bradley's shots tore through the house and anyone who was still hiding inside. The 25 mm cannon was excellent for penetrating and destroying brick or block walls, regardless of their thickness. The high explosive shells caused, which was devastating for the personnel inside the structures. At the end of the firing, the soldiers went in to check the bodies of the enemies among the debris. The fighting continued in the streets. Smoke was dissipating, accompanied by screams. Akosduta and Nush. Tanks burned from the impact of the Iraqi attacks. American helicopters flew in using their cannons to silence the enemies permanently. But more of them appeared around the corners, always bringing more fire to the battles. The insurgency intensified with attacks on neighborhoods, convoys, patrols, and checkpoints becoming daily occurrences. Sunni groups and later Shia groups began to organize coordinated attacks. Sectarianism kept intensifying. And if anyone thought that many of these so-called good leaders simply attacked the evil Americans, he understood little about Iraq and was probably on an lysergic acid diethylamide trip.
He was one of those deluded people who believes that
Muslims are a single nation and that the war is divided between good and evil. People with a brain that's too naive or whose reason has been killed by ideology. Proof of this happened in March in Karbala and Baghdad during the Shiite holiday of Ashura. The targets were precisely the followers of this branch of Islam. 9 devastating explosions shook Karbala, breaking the silence as the roar of mortars, grenades, and rockets claimed more than 100 lives. Gazomasa. While blood was still running through the streets, 3 explosions near the Kadimia shrine in Baghdad added another 58 deaths to the massacre. The attacks were not just random explosions, they were a meticulously planned massacre. The United States, in a way, even tried to intervene. There were patrols throughout the cities. Tyler was on one of them. In December of that year, they passed through Al-Qaim under the suspicious eyes of the Iraqis. But everything went well. The convoy finished the patrol and began the return to base. They moved slowly through the dusty streets. An Iraqi approached as if he wanted to cross the street. He stopped near the American vehicle and shouted Allah Akbar. The shout made everyone's hair stand up. No one could do much. Additionally, fire erupted from the man's body, consuming flesh and bone. The energy from the explosion went through the vehicle. Tyler's armored vehicle. He felt the twisted metal open up as the fire groped through the air until it found his body. He tried to lift himself up on his left arm, but the shattered bones scraped along the floor of the destroyed vehicle, unable to support him. In the midst of the fire, the adrenaline from the impact still kept him half awake. Not feeling the pain from the destroyed fingers on his right hand, he groped along the hot metal, blood dripping. Only one eye tried to see through the smoke. His mind was confused. He ran his hand over his head and his fingers sank into an empty space. Afterwards, they almost grabbed the shards, pieces stuck to the skull. He couldn't even cry from the pain when he felt himself being pulled out of the flames. The reason he didn't cry wasn't even the adrenaline, but the fact that the fire of war had devoured his tear ducts. The man who pulled him out fell down exhausted from the effort. Tyler couldn't smell the smoke. He moved his head, scraping the remains of his ear along the dirt road. Then, the world turned to darkness. The world only started to make sense again for Tyler in the United States, inside a hospital in San Antonio, Texas. It was there, among the sterile corridors of Brooke Medical Center, that Renee appeared, leaving her city for the first time to stay by his side. She became his loyal shadow, a constant presence as he faced the brutal scars that the war had left him. His body was shattered, requiring intense surgeries, endless months of rehabilitation, and a slow, painful, almost impossible reconstruction. But Renee remained at every appointment, every night of agony. She was there, his silent sentinel, alongside Tyler's mother. 18 months passed before Tyler could finally return home. They moved into his mother's house, sharing the weight of waiting, turning anguish into routine. The return was not just a journey, it was a rebirth. He, the wounded soldier who survived hell, and she, the quiet strength who never faltered. Together, they had crossed the abyss and emerged on the other side, scarred, yes, but still whole where it mattered most. They were 21 and 24 years old when they decided to get married. The ceremony was memorable. It was December 7th, October 2006, and people said that it was the victory of love. The photos showed smiles, but in one of them, hidden among the official images, Significa, there was a lost look. The true portrait of what that union meant. Life went on, but the scars were too deep. The weight of being by the side of a hero led Ren to marriage. He became one. Talbot often saw himself as a product of the military machine, but his image was used as a hero, as a symbol of resilience, as justification for others to follow the same path. At that time, Tyler watched his brother go to Iraq and be commanded by the very man who pulled him out of the burning vehicle. The words they had for him were that he hoped he wouldn't have to fight for his brother to welcome him, his rights as a former soldier who sacrificed for his country. Years went by. The supposed weapons of mass destruction of Saddam Hussein. It was nothing more than a rhetorical ghost, a lie repeated until it sounded like the truth. No evidence was found, but that mattered little. The war had already taken its toll. Tyler, even with his smile featured in campaigns and reports, carried the war inside him. He saw in the mirror. He felt it in the absence of the arm that itched, even though it didn't exist, on the skin hardened by the flames, which made it hard for him to smile, something he insisted on keeping as part of his resilience. If asked about Ren, he would say there was no hurt or remorse, there was the smile of a teenage love. After the marriage, his companion changed. Unfortunately, physical and invisible pains never left him, and it was in an attempt to silence them that accidentally he passed away. His family announced with deep sorrow that Tyler Ziegel passed away on December 26, 2012, the victim of an overdose of alcohol and morphine. The mixture, unintentionally, was fatal to the man who had survived so much. In his honor, 2,000 flags were planted along the streets, stretching for miles, a well-deserved tribute, but little compared to the suffering and acknowledgement that would not give back the lost years, nor erase the fact that his story would, for some, be just another flag to be used, an empty symbol, capable of sending other young people to the same fate. Tyler survived the war, but in the end, the war didn't let him survive, and his face, deformed by it, was a reflection of the story of someone with a good soul and good intentions, deceived by politicians into going to war. That face would, in a way, be a metaphor for his story, which would be distorted by so many to talk about heroism and patriotism. To keep running the machine that would produce so many other Tylers over the years. Any country, in any army, in any young heart.